So I just wanted to start by acknowledging the genesis of this book, which changed my life. I think all the creativity we encounter, whatever art form, changes our lives if we truly open our hearts to them. And it certainly was this, in 1988, I had emerged from my cancer journey in my 30s, where I almost died from a rare form of lymphoma. And on the other side of that, totally put inside out and upside down, I started seeing day books everywhere. I had people in my life who were in recovery, different forms of recovery. And boy, I was seeing from the rooms, whether it was Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Love Addicts Anonymous, you name it. There were all these day books really used in cars, in bathrooms, in people's back pockets. And I saw it then as a kind of a modern sonnet, spiritual sonnet form. And I thought, if I could just fill this form with small doses of what matter, it might be a way to give back. And that was the beginning of a 3-year journey in retrieving and recording the Book of Awakening. And I would say to you that, the one truth I've learned over all these years is that we travel so far only to land where we are. Or we imagine other lives only to meet who we are. And we seek out love in special ways only to find that everyone is special. And honestly, we can't avoid this journey. It is precisely through it that when blessed, we wake to the life we want by being present to the life we have. And you might recognize that as the subtitle of the Book of Awakening. To have the life you want by being present to the life you have. And in this timeless common way, we venture out into the life of experience, only to rediscover more deeply what lives in the very center. And in this way, as our soul meets the days, we're always just beginning. In this way, our very lives are a book of awakening, just waiting to be read by our heart so we can find and live our path. So let me move here and start with 2 quotes as a way to kind of frame our opening time. One is from Kabir, who was the Hindu poet from the 1400s. Very, very similar to Rumi. Kabir, marvelous voice. And one of the things he said was, if you can't cross over alive, how can you cross when you're dead? If you can't cross over alive, how can you cross when you're dead? And the second quote is a few centuries later in the late 1700s by a Japanese monk and poet, Ryokan, Ryokan. And he was a marvelous, sincere and playful monk. In fact, his name means great fool, because he was lovingly called that because he couldn't resist, no matter what they were doing as monks, working or studying or meditating. If he saw children, he'd drop everything and go play with the children. And everybody started to call him with a smile in their heart, oh, what a great fool he is. And so his name became Ryokan. But this is a wonderful thing, a profound thing that he said. He said, in all 10 directions of the universe, there is only one truth. When we see clearly, the great teachings are the same. What can ever be lost? What can be attained? If we attain something, it was there from the beginning of time. If we lose something, it is hiding somewhere near us. And from a very young age, I've always resonated with that saying from Ryokan. So let me move into some of the sharings from the Book of Awakening. And let's start by talking about the nature of being alive. And our greatest tool or avenue or skill to recovering the nature of being alive is presence. And our presence, our direct experience of life, always returns us to how rare it is to be here at all. So I want to tell this little story before reading the opening piece from the Book of Awakening, which is about this. But this is a Buddha story, a story from the life of Buddha. And in one of his sessions, his teaching sessions, a student asked Buddha, well, how rare is it to be born in human form? And Buddha paused very thoughtfully. And then he said, imagine a giant sea turtle asleep at the bottom of the ocean. Imagine it wakes, makes its way to the surface, pops its head out, looks around. Now imagine that giant turtle goes back to the bottom and falls asleep, and no one knows really how long. And then Buddha said, the odds of that sea turtle breaking surface in the same exact spot twice, that's how rare it is to be born in human form. What a wonderful image. So I think the work of self-awareness is to recover through presence how rare it is to be here at all, because when we feel that, it cleanses our eyes and ears and mind and heart, and we see and make different decisions. So I want to read to you the opening passage from the Book of Awakening on January 1, which is about this Buddhist notion of our precious human birth. There is a Buddhist precept that asks us to be mindful of how rare it is to find ourselves in human form on earth. It's really a beautiful view of life that offers us the chance to feel enormous appreciation for the fact that we are here at all as individual spirits filled with consciousness, drinking water, chopping wood, doing the dishes, paying the bills. It asks us to look about at the ant and the antelope, at the worm and the butterfly, at the dog and the bull, at the hawk and the wild lonely tiger, at the 100-year-old oak and the 1,000-year-old patch of ocean. It asks us to understand that no other life form has the consciousness of being that we are privileged to. It asks us to recognize that of all the endless species of plant and animal and mineral that make up the earth, a very small portion of life has the wakefulness of spirit that we call being human. Now, plants and minerals and animals, they may have their own consciousness, I'm certain they do, but this consciousness, this wakefulness we call being human is quite unique. That I can rise from some depth of awareness to express this to you right now, and that you can receive me in this instant. Well, this is part of our precious human birth. You could have been an ant. I could have been an ant eater. You could have been rain. I could have been a lick of salt. But we are blessed in this time, in this place, to be human beings, alive in rare ways we often take for granted. All of this to say, this precious human birth is unrepeatable. So what will you do today, knowing you are one of the rarest forms of life to ever walk the earth? How will you carry yourself? What will you do with your hands? What will you ask, and of whom? Tomorrow you could die and become an ant, and someone will be setting traps for you. But today you are precious and rare and awake. It ushers us into grateful living. It makes hesitation useless. Grateful and awake, ask what you need to know now. Say what you feel now. Love what you love now. And so this amazing thing we call presence, it invokes the central paradox of being alive, and that is that no one has ever been here who's you. No one can live your life for you, but no one can make it alone. No one can make it alone. And all the traditions speak about this differently, but everyone will have a chance to be dropped into the depth of life. And it doesn't matter whether great love or great suffering lead you there. But this is when the journey truly opens, when we are dropped into the depth of life. What matters is how we face this moment, and if and how we keep each other company when that depth begins. So the great gift of presence is that no matter how confused or in pain or in fear or troubled we may be, presence will restore our direct connection with life by reminding us how rare it is to be here at all. So I want to tell this story. This is from another entry in the Book of Awakening, and I refer to my oldest dear friend, Robert, who lives in Albany, New York, and I'm godfather to his 3 kids who are now in their 30s. And I saw them all the day they were born, and while they were little, and Robert has an old home that he's rehabbed in Albany, New York, and he was telling me the story of how there's a 3-season porch, and he was going to paint it, wanted to refreshen it up and paint it, and so he told me how, one spring he went to the store and got the gallons of red paint. He liked red, and the sticks that you mix it, and the brushes, and the turpentine, and the paint thinner, and the rags. And then he had it all laid out outside on the lawn behind the porch in the backyard. And so he picked everything up, and he had everything in his arms, and the mixing stick in his mouth, and the rag, and he was trying to open the door to the porch with both his arms and his mouth full, when he slipped and fell and spilled red paint all over himself. And one of the things I love about Robert is he's very quick to laugh at himself. And laughing, we looked at this, and this simple story raises a basic human sequence that often stops us. The human journey is to gather, prepare, and this is the one that we always have trouble with, and to put down what is not necessary before we enter. If we try to carry everything, we're going to spill red paint all over ourselves. So this is the human sequence of awareness. Gather, prepare, put down, and then enter. And this speaks to the courage to put things down before we enter, because gathering them actually prepares us. Often we don't need a lot of what we carry once we've done the preparation. The next piece I want to share, I do want to read this piece, and it's a foundational piece for me. It's early in January in the Book of Awakening, called Unlearning Back to God. And I feel like the journey of writing is a journey of discovery. And so really at its deepest, I listen and take notes. And in the taking notes, I certainly add pieces of myself and my own feelings and thoughts and questions. But it's really listening and taking notes. And this piece really feels has been central in guiding my life. It's called Unlearning Back to God. Each person is born with an unencumbered spot, free of expectation and regret, free of ambition and embarrassment, free of fear and worry, an umbilical spot of grace that issues peace. Now, psychologists call this spot the psyche. Theologians call it the soul. Carl Jung called it the seat of the unconscious. Hindu masters call it Atman. Buddhists call it Dharma. The great German poet Rilke called it inwardness. Sufis call it Qalb, Q-A-L-B. And Jesus calls it the center of our love. And there are more names. To know this spot of inwardness is to know who we are, not by surface markers of identity, not by where we work or what we wear or how we'd like to be addressed, but by feeling our place in relation to the infinite and by inhabiting it. Now, this is a hard lifelong task. For the nature of becoming is a constant filming over of where we begin, while the nature of being is a constant erosion of what is not essential. Each of us lives in the midst of this tension. We grow tarnished or covered over only to be worn back to that incorruptible spot of grace at our core. When the film is worn through, we have moments of enlightenment, moments of wholeness. Again, there are many names for this. Moments of satori, as the Zen sages term it. Moments of clear living when inner meets outer, or we could call it full integrity, moments of full integrity or complete oneness. And whether that film is a veil of culture of memory, of mental or religious training, of personal trauma or sophistication. The removal of that film and the restoration of that timeless spot of grace is the goal of all therapy and education. Regardless of subject matter, it could be math, botany, physics, dance. Regardless of subject matter, this is the only thing worth teaching. How to uncover that original center and how to live there once it is restored. Now, we call the filming over a deadening of heart, but the process of return, whether brought about through love or suffering, well, that is how we unlearn our way back to God. And the practice of our presence helps us remove that veil and return to that incorruptible spot of grace. Now, the next story, this actually comes, it's a teaching story, but it comes from China, and it really comes from probably what was one of the first no-kill traps. So in China, hundreds of years ago, in order to catch monkeys, hunters, without harming them, they would get coconuts, and they would hollow out the coconut and leave an opening in one end the size of an extended monkey paw, and they'd fill the coconut with rice because monkeys love rice. And then they would strap down the rice-filled, hollowed out coconut on the migration path of monkeys, and then they'd go away and do other chores or whatever they needed to do. And sure, they'd come back a day or two, and sure enough, every coconut on the path had a monkey whose paw was caught in the coconut because they fisted the rice. So they would put their extended monkey paw in and fist the rice, and fisted, they couldn't free themselves from the coconut, and they were trapped. And very quickly, the philosophers and teachers of the time saw the wonderful teaching metaphor in this, because monkeys, as long as they held onto the rice, even though they couldn't eat it, they were prisoners. They were prisoners of their own hunger, even though they couldn't eat the rice, because somehow, and this is how one of the reasons we have the term monkey mind, somehow they thought that was the only rice in the world. And even though they couldn't eat it, they wouldn't let go. Only when they let go of the rice were they free. Now, I first learned this story, I'm 70 now, I learned this story in my late 30s, maybe around 40. And as soon as I heard this, it helped me understand my lifelong struggle with my mother, who was an angry person who withheld her love. And I was always under the influence of her rejection. And I realized the minute I heard this story, her love was my rice. I held on to it for dear life, even though I couldn't have it, as if it were the only love in the world. And only when I let go of it was I free to discover love in other places. So my question to take home, I'll ask you a few of these during our time today. My first take-home question for you is to journal with, to discuss with a loved one or a friend. What is your rice? What is it that you are holding, clinging on to, that you refuse to let go, even though you can't have it? What is your rice? One of the other places that I did find love, especially maternal love, was my grandmother on my father's side. She was more of a mother to me than my own mother, and I loved her dearly. And she lived to be 93, and toward the end of her life, the last few years, this was before there was formal assisted living, and she lived in a wing of a hospital in Brooklyn Medical Center, Kingsbrook Jewish Medical Center in Brooklyn. It's no longer there. It's been replaced by other things. But then she was in a wing of a hospital where just by default, elders were kind of in assisted living, though they didn't call it that. And I would go to see her. I was living in upstate New York, teaching high school at the time, and I would just love to go see her whenever I could. I'd drive to 300 miles or so. And so she was 92 or so. And I went in on a beautiful, beautiful May day. And she was living in one room. She had one little window and her bed. And I got into the room just before she saw me. And I saw her from the side and she looked very glum. And I said, "Hello, Grandma, hey." And I said, "Grandma, what's the matter?" And in her thick Jewish Russian accent, she said, "Oh, it's a gray day." Well, it was a beautiful day. And I thought, well, my parents were preparing me that maybe she was not as lucid as she used to be. But then I looked around the room, and there she did have one window which hadn't been cleaned in probably a year. So the window was caked on both sides. And so the light wasn't coming through. And yes, for her, it was a gray day. And I said, "Grandma, the window's dirty. I'll get it cleaned. It's a beautiful day. Let's go out into the courtyard." And sitting on the edge of the bed, almost 100 years old, with the wisdom and presence of an immigrant who had traveled across an ocean as a young person, she chuckled and she said, "Got a dirty eye, see a dirty world. Got a dirty eye, see a dirty world." I call that immigrant wisdom. And I can't tell you how many times that wisdom from Grandma has saved me. Yeah, yes, there will be legitimate gray days, but before we put all of our effort and heart and mind into meeting a gray day, let's make sure the window is clean. The window of our mind, the window of our eye, the window of our heart. Let's make sure the window is clean so that we can be present and meet what is ours to meet. So let me share with you, this is about the halfway mark of these stories, and I want to share with you a small poem. It's a recent poem called "Inside Everything." Keep trying to hide, and in time, you become a wall. Keep trying to love, and in time, you become love. Our journey on earth is to stop hiding so we can become love. Everything else is a seduction and a distraction. Courage is staying true. So for the second half, the second group here, I want to share 5 stories. We'll see if we get to them all, but 5 water stories. They all involve water, but they are all about the practice of staying real. And they're all somewhere in the Book of Awakening. Now, the first story, actually the first 2 come from ancient Hindu teaching stories, anonymous teaching stories. I love these ancient anonymous stories. You know, before there were universities and certificates and degrees and programs, education was passed down through stories. So this first story, there is a master and an apprentice. There's always a master and an apprentice. And the truth be known, the master finds the apprentice very annoying because he's always complaining about life. Oh my God, complain, complain, complain. So one day, the master says to the apprentice, "I want you to get a handful of salt, put it in a glass of water, and bring it to me quietly." So the apprentice does just this, and he comes before the master, and the master says, "Drink." And the apprentice drinks from the glass, and he spits it out. The master says, "Well, what's the matter?" And the apprentice says, "It's bitter." The master nods his head, and he says, "I want you to get the same exact handful of salt and follow me quietly." So the apprentice gets the same amount of salt. He has it cupped in his hands, and he follows the master, who leads him to a lake. And the master says to the apprentice, "Put the salt in the lake." And the apprentice kneels down, swishes the salt in the lake, and the master says, "Drink." The apprentice kneels down and he scoops up some water and drinks, and it dribbles down his chin. And the master says, "Well?" And the apprentice says, "Oh, it's fresh." And the master looks at the apprentice and says, "Stop being a glass, become a lake. Stop being a glass, become a lake. Ancient anonymous teaching story. And what this story that's hundreds of years old tells us, it tells us how to meet fear and pain. No one can escape fear and pain. It's like gravity. But everyone will get their handful of salt. Some of us will get it a lump all at once, or clumps at a time, or a grain at a time. But everyone will get their handful of salt. So the only way we can meet fear and pain is to enlarge our sense of things. Stop being a glass, become a lake. We will not eliminate fear and pain, but we can right-size it. If we stay small, then we not only suffer, but we will grow bitter. But when we can enlarge our sense of things, we lose the bitterness, and the fear and pain can be right-sized. Now, you may hear this story and think, well, it's not good to be a glass. I won't do that again. Oh, yes, you will, and so will I, because we're human. And this is how pain and fear say hello. We become a glass, we tighten, but we don't have to stay a glass. Stop being a glass, become a lake. The second Hindu teaching story, well, this involves a man, a holy man, a sage really, who doesn't know that he's holy or that he's a sage, which is very endearing. And in Vasanari in India, which is along the Ganges River, and it's well known for centuries that the steps go right into the river from the temple, and hundreds of people pray every day in the Ganges. And this man who doesn't know he's holy or that he's a sage, he's in the water up to his knees and he's praying and kind of rocking, when all of a sudden he sees a spider struggling in the water next to him. Well, so he stops, he leans over, he picks up the spider. Well, it's a poisonous spider, which he doesn't know, but because he's a holy man that doesn't know he's holy, because he's a sage that doesn't know he's a sage, he's stung by the spider, but not poisoned, and he feels it, but he takes the spider and he puts it on the shore, and he goes back to praying. Well, the next day, well, hard to believe, but the same thing happens. There, he's praying, he's rocking, there's the same spider. He stops again, he scoops the spider up again, the spider stings him, and he puts the spider on the shore. Well, the third day, the same thing happens. And as he picks up the spider looks at him and says, "Don't you understand? I will sting you every time, because that is what I do." And the holy man who doesn't know he's holy says, "And don't you understand? I will save you every time, because that is what I do." And this isn't just a story about altruism or kindness. This story tells us in the spiritual physics of the world that the strength of our kindness dilutes the sting of the world. The strength of our kindness dilutes the sting of the world. That's very powerful. There is strength in kindness. Strength in kindness. I was very moved that when I was telling this story years ago, I was teaching at a medical school, and a young intern a woman who had come from India, her parents had come from India, she said, "My grandmother told me that story when I was a little girl." Wisdom is carried on. Stories, stories, stories. You know, the great Muriel Rukeyser, who was a poet of the last century, in one of her poems, she says, say it, the universe is not made up of atoms, but stories. Stories hold the world together. So now we go farther back in time to this is an indigenous story from the New Hebrides, which is a Polynesian island out in the Pacific. And in the New Hebrides, in this ancient tradition, this is a story that tells us how human beings lost their ability to be immortal. It was believed in many indigenous cultures that human beings could shed their skin like snakes or crabs and therefore stay immortal. So in this story, there is a female chief, a chiefess, whose name is Ulta Marama, which means change skin of the world. And one day, Ulta Marama, she realizes, she catches her reflection and she thinks, I'm getting old again, as has happened before. And she says it's time. And she goes to the river where she does the ritual and she sheds her old skin and becomes young again, though she is, 1,000 years old inside. And as she leaves the river to go back to the village, to her family, she notices out of the corner of her eye that her old skin is caught on a piece of driftwood, a branch near the bank, but she thinks nothing of it. And as she approaches her village, her teenage daughter sees her approaching, but doesn't recognize her because she looks young. She waves to her daughter, but her daughter is frightened. She says, "Who are you?" She says, "Oh, no, it's me. It's your mother." She said, "I don't know you. Get away from me. I don't know who you are. I want my mother." She says, "No, in time, I will teach you how to shed your skin. In time, it'll be a beautiful thing we share." And she goes to put her arm around her, and her teenage daughter pulls away, repulsed, angry, afraid. And so Ulta Marama, to appease the fear and anger of her daughter, returns to the river and puts her old skin on. And from that day forward, human beings lost their ability to be immortal. What a powerful story. And who, if we're honest, who among us has not done this? Who among us has put on an old dead way of being, has not put on an old dead way of being, feeling, thinking, to appease the fear or worry or anger of a loved one? But that is not our job. Ulta Marama robbed her daughter of the difficulty of facing life, of the difficulty of facing life. And so what this teaches us, can we be immortal literally? No, we can't. But what this story says is that when we put on an old dead way, when we pretend not to be real, whether it's feeling, thinking, being, we lose our access to what is eternal. Oh, wow. That is powerful. So this whole story raises the original definition of the word sacrifice. We have seen great sacrifice of giving, even of our lives for the sake of the common good, whether that's through the history of the military or health workers who have helped us unbelievably through this pandemic, and grocery store owners and restaurant owners and mail people, everyone. But that sacrifice comes out of the deeper soil of sacrifice. The original definition of the word sacrifice means giving up what no longer works in order to stay close to what is sacred. Which tells us that what is sacred will always be there, but what works will change because we change. So sometimes we have to give up something because it no longer works, so that we can try something else that will return us to what is sacred. So my second question for you to be with over time: what is not working for you right now in your life that you need to give up in order to stay close to what is sacred? So this brings us to another Buddha story. And this is the story of Buddha and the Raft. So Buddha, who would walk from a very nomadic life, he would walk from town to town, from city to city. And there was there wasn't a lot of media back then, no CNN, so it was very unheralded. No one really knew where he was going. And he was walking by himself, and he came upon a river that was very wide and deep and a very fast current. And there were no boats, no ferry, no one around. And so in order to cross, he spent a day building a makeshift raft out of branches and reeds. And sure enough, it was sturdy enough to hold him. He crossed the river. He took the the raft out. It was dripping wet. He hoisted it on his back and kept walking on his way. And a couple of hours later, he realized he didn't smell water anymore. And so it occurred to Buddha, I may not have to cross any more rivers. Why am I carrying this raft on my back? And this is the difference between most of us and the Buddha nature in us. He didn't just discard the raft. He stopped and spent the night. He built a fire, and he did a sacred ritual in which he burned the raft and thanked it, saying, I would rather burn you in reverence than carry you on my back in resentment. I'd rather burn you in reverence than carry you on my back in resentment. And then he went on his way. So one of the things that this brings us to is that, which is very relevant right now in our individual lives and in our society, on the other side of this pandemic, well, we're getting to the other side of this pandemic, when there is great change, when things no longer work, and we have to stay close to what is sacred, there are three perennial questions that we are called to ask. What needs to be repaired? What needs to be reimagined? And what needs to be left dismantled now that it is broken? What should not be put back together? And I think these questions are very relevant now. So my third take-home journal question or conversation question for you is to personalize these questions, to ask yourself in this moment in your life, in where we are in the midst of this pandemic, what in your life needs to be repaired? What in your life needs to be reimagined? And what, now that it's broken in your life, needs to be left dismantled so you can begin again? So I have one more story. So this story, notice all these stories involve water. Okay, the salt in the glass, the spider and the sage and the Ganges, Ultima Rama going to shed her skin one more time in the river, and Buddha and the raft crossing the river. And now we come to a story which also involves, you'll see, a monkey, but a master. Again, we have a master and an apprentice. This master sends his apprentice to go and listen to the river until the river has taught him everything it has to say. And he's a very serious student. So he takes his meditation cushion and his robe and his chimes and he goes down to the river, and he spends the whole first half of the first day finding the right spot to sit. First, he's way too close. The roar of the river just takes him away from everything else. So then he backs up, and now he's too far away. Finally, he settles halfway under a willow tree, and he, in earnest, goes into serious meditation. And after 3 days, nothing. The only thing he has for his efforts is a terrific headache. His head is pounding. He doesn't understand why his master sent him there. And just at that moment, out of nowhere, a monkey comes along and jumps in the river in front of him, splashing and hooting and yelping. Ah! And it cracks the apprentice. He starts to weep. And he gathers his things. He goes back to his master. He tells him the whole story. And his master puts his arm around him lovingly, and he says, the monkey heard, you just listened. The monkey heard, you just listened. And this ancient anonymous story tells us that, yes, there's a lot we can learn from observing and from watching, but the goal is to get wet in the river of life. It's not to watch the river, it's to get wet in the river of experience. The monkey heard, you just listened. So certainly curiosity is important if it leads us to wonder, which is jumping in the river. We are to lead an embodied life. So if we look at these stories, every day, every one of us is faced with the chance to enlarge our sense of things when faced with pain. to meet what stings us with the strength of our kindness, to give up what no longer works in order to stay close to what is sacred, to put down an old way of being, seeing, feeling, doing, to put down anything that doesn't feel real so we can have access to what is eternal. Every day we're asked to put down in gratitude what weighs us down rather than carry it in resentment, and to enter life rather than watch it. From the beginning of time, human beings have faced these chances to be real again and again. And so I invite you to think about and personalize each of these that we've been talking about. So that brings us to a poem of mine that I want to share. This poem is called If You Want a True Friend. If you want a true friend, just open your hands and say, I don't know. Say it softly and wait so your other can see that you mean it. Give them a chance to drop what they think is secret. Let them come up with a cup of what matters from the spring they show no one. Let them sigh and admit that they don't know either. Then you can begin with nothing in the way. Go on, admit to the throb you carry in your heart, and let the journey begin. Let me share a few things by way of closing, and thank you for being so present today. The first is a quote from Nietzsche, the German philosopher. It's from later in his life. It's very different from his early work, but I feel it could be an anthem of our time. He said, I want to learn more and more to see as beautiful what is necessary. Then I shall be one of those who makes things beautiful. I want to learn more and more to see as beautiful what is necessary. Then I shall be one of those who makes things beautiful. And the second is a story that I want to share. I consider it a modern myth, and it comes from the life. I had a mentor and friend who died at the age of 102. His name was Joel Elkes, and he was a child of the Holocaust. He was spared the Holocaust because his parents sensed what was going on and sent him from Lithuania to London as a teenager. He never saw his father again, but he did see his mother, who spent her remaining years in Israel. And one day, as often happens with Holocaust survivors, she never talked about it, but one day, as an elder, she started talking about it to Joel as if they'd been in conversation all along. And she shared this, which I am so touched by. She said that there were two small things that helped her survive Auschwitz. One was that she carried every day a broken crust of bread that she hid somewhere on her person in case during the day she ran into someone more in need than her. And the second was she had very few belongings, but she had a broken piece of comb. And every night before she went to sleep, she combed her hair, not to look pretty, but to affirm her person. I count this as a modern myth. And I ask you, what is it that you carry with you every day in case you run into someone more in need than you? And what gesture do you do either morning or night, not to look pretty, but to affirm your person? And I invite you to tell that story and ask those questions of others. And finally, I want to share a poem of mine. Some of you know it. It's called Free Fall. It's kind of like my spiritual handshake. And thank you again. It's been a joy to be with you. And thank you, Steve and Ed, for making this possible. Free fall. If you have 1 hour of air and many hours to go, you must breathe slowly. If you have 1 arm's length and many things to care for, you must give freely. If you have 1 chance to know God and many doubts, You must set your heart on fire. We are blessed. Each day is a chance. We have 2 arms. Fear wastes air.